What scientific myth is still considered true by many? Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to the Vancher channel. Also, please share your thoughts on this video in the comments. Let's get started. Story 1. I'm convinced that whoever is keeping the pee on a jellyfish sting myth alive just has an alternative taste. Answer: in fairness, I can see where the myth comes from. My hometown would get a lot of jellyfish during the warmer months. Every public beach had a little letterbox on it with a bottle full of vinegar in case someone got stung. Jellyfish venom is somewhat basic, and vinegar is acidic, so it helps to neutralize some of the effects of the venom as well as clean the wound. Pee can be acidic, but it is way more inconsistent than vinegar. So yeah, still best not to do it, but that's probably where it comes from. Story 2. Honestly, a ton of people still believe we only use 10% of our brains. Neuroscience has completely debunked it, but it's somehow stuck around in pop culture forever. Story 3. Hopefully it's not so common anymore, but a child lifting weights will not stunt their growth. I was told this quite a lot growing up, especially at 14 when I started hitting the gym. If you damage your growth plates through an injury that can impact your growth, but any sport has a chance for injury, plus there's more to strength training than just weightlifting, especially at the start. Puberty is probably the best time to put on muscle, which has pretty big benefits later in life. Answer: going to add to this, it's upsetting the number of people who seem to think that kids can just get injured and they'll recover absolutely fine because they're young and kids heal quickly, so we don't need to worry about an accident possibly affecting them for the rest of their life or what might happen later in life because they had this injury, so on and so forth. Story 4. Evolution does not equal linear progress. It means adaptation to best suit the surroundings. A more accurate term instead of survival of the fittest would be survival of whatever works. Answer: survival of whatever works. Many people also misunderstand the survival part. It isn't about just staying alive. It's about staying alive to reproduce. That's why age-related things are stuff that still allows you to reproduce before it affects you. Don't get bred out. As long as you're rearing to go at 20, evolution doesn't give a darn about your Parkinson's at 70. Story 5. We had a porcupine on the playground a few weeks ago, and half our school staff thought that they could shoot its quills 10 feet away. Answer: LOL. We routinely see porcupines. I'm always impressed by my friends who are like, that can't be a porcupine, it doesn't have quills. Then I have to explain that they don't walk around all day like a pincushion. They only raise the quills when they feel threatened. It's very similar to a cat that when it feels threatened, it fluffs itself up. Porcupines do the same thing, only with quills. I had never heard that people thought they shoot the quills, so that gave me a great laugh. Story 6. That microwaves are dangerous in the same sense as ionizing radiation, X-rays, gamma rays, etc. Same with the 5G nutters. I've actually met people who refuse to eat microwave food because they think it's radioactive and will give them cancer and 2 heads. Story 7. That coffee dehydrates you. Caffeine is a mild diuretic, but the fluid intake of drinking a cup of coffee outweighs this mild diuretic effect. Story 8. So many people still think that you catch the common cold simply from exposure to cold weather. Answer: I don't really think this is fair to count as a myth. Sure, a blast of cold isn't going to be the same as someone sick sneezing on you, but being exposed to the cold for a long time does increase your chances of either getting a cold, rhinovirus, or getting cold-like symptoms. Your body is always fighting a lot. When you cool yourself off, you make it harder for your immune system to work, as well as deprive your body of energy as it works to keep you warm. This provides an opportunity for you to get sick. In addition, the cold is just very harsh on mucous membranes and can cause dryness and inflammation that mimics cold symptoms. The temp thing is the biggest though. There's a reason it isn't recommended to take medicines that lower your fever while ill unless your fever is at dangerously high temps. Your body warming up is intentional to help fight pathogens. Edit: taking fever-reducing medicine for no reason other than reducing fever. If your illness is actively causing you severe discomfort, especially impacting rest, it is better to take medicine that relieves your symptoms and allows you to rest and recover more efficiently. Story 9. Not directly a myth, but I cannot stand when people denounce something because it has the theory title attached. My religious grandma says science calls it the Big Bang Theory because it's likely fake and is impossible to prove. Some people don't understand how impressive something must be to be titled a theory in science. Story 10. Carrots are good for your eyes. It turns out that the British military made it up as a cover for their superior radar technology. Story 11. That defibrillators can restart a dead person's heart. It angers me that it's still used on TV and movies. But even worse is that grown adults believe it will work. Defibrillators only work to shock a heart that is out of rhythm back into a normal heart rhythm. Story 12. Chiropractic. Too many people think they're a type of doctor. They're alternative medicine, like acupuncture. The difference is that it's a Western alternative, so it's culturally embedded and people don't think twice. Answer: dry needling has some scientific basis, which is based on acupuncture. I would never go to a chiropractor, but after 8 years of chronic back pain, I let my PT do dry needling on my neck, and after one session, my pain was almost 100 gone. Now, I've done it for other things since that time, and it hasn't done much. But I had a persistent LVL3 pain on my scale, and it solved it immediately. Placebo? I doubt it. Story 13. The moon landings were faked. In reality, some 400,000 people were involved, with numerous vendors and businesses, everyone from surfers in California who worked on honeycomb insulation for Saturn V rocket body, to grannies adept at knitting who literally weaved rope core memory to build the Apollo software. All kinds of new innovations and technologies came about from the space race, and it's one of the main reasons that computing power, data storage along with miniaturization of digital components was accelerated to reach the consumer market. Nuclear weapons development also played a major role. Answer: it really comes down to radio signals that can be triangulated. There was no question we went to the moon and back. None. Unless you believe we sent a bot broadcasting fake signals on top of a giant rocket to land on the moon, send signals back, and then return. Something functionally impossible at the time. Not just the Soviets, anyone with a radio dish could have figured out it wasn't real. Story 14. That dyslexia is a visual processing disorder. That's why media still will say people see letters or words backwards or out of order. It's a neurological issue where someone has trouble with phonological processing, but there is more to it than that since it doesn't only affect reading and writing. Answer: I actually use my dyslexia to help gauge when I need to be done and just crash. I have health issues, and a lot of the times I have to push even if I'm not feeling good, but at a certain point I'm more likely to mess things up than get things done. The more pain I'm in, or the more tired I am, the worse my dyslexia gets. When I start noticing my dyslexia acting up in ways it normally doesn't, I know I need to just be done. I have reached the point of too tired or in too much pain or mix of both. Edit: not sure why I felt the need to share this. Possibly because I'm very tired right now and should be giving up and going to bed. Story 15. I have met numerous adults that believe the Underground Railroad used by the slaves to escape to the North was a functioning railroad with a train that went underground. A lot of people believe that slaves escaped on the subway. Story 16. Tetanus doesn't come from rusty metal. Tetanus grows in decaying organic matter and dirt. It got associated with rusty metal because people would go into a junkyard, get a bunch of cuts on their feet and legs, then get tetanus from walking around in dirt and dead leaves. Answer: distinction without a functional difference. It's not that someone would get a cut and then walk around in dirt. It's the fact that a rusty object is a nice porous, sharp object, and the rust is a good sign that it could also be a contaminated object. It's perfect for collecting contaminated dirt or dust, and then also for pushing it deep into flesh. While the rust isn't the cause, it's just a good sign that it could have Clostridium tetanus contamination on it. You can get tetanus from a rusty nail. Absolutely true. Rust causes tetanus, not true. Story 17. You only use 10 of your brain. Believe me, it's such an energy hog that if the human body didn't need 90 of its brain, it wouldn't have 90 of its brain. No, we use the entirety of the brain. At times, though, we may only be using 10 of it, but it all gets used every day. Story 18. That your hair and skin continue to grow after you die. They don't. The skin pulls back and makes it look like your hair and nails grow. Story 19. Oh gosh, here's an unpopular one that always gets me a lot of pushback. If you are female and have a normally developed genitourinary system, then you have a hymen. So many women believe they were born without a hymen because they never noticed a saran wrap like covering to their vaginal introitus or never bled with penetrative intimacy. On that same line, no, you did not break your hymen by riding a horse, doing gymnastics, or any other routine childhood activity. The misunderstanding comes from people not knowing what a hymen actually looks like. A normal hymen is a ring of tissue surrounding the vaginal introitus that should not cover the opening itself. If it is covering, then that's called an imperforate hymen and is considered an abnormal finding which often needs surgical correction. The hymen itself is actually quite tough and flexible, so the likelihood of having a hymenal tear without known significant penetrative injury is extremely low. Hymen tears in prepubescent children are, unfortunately, highly specific, though not sensitive for intimacy abuse. They are also extraordinarily painful, and something you would absolutely notice. The large majority are vaginal injuries during childhood, each having bleeding and pain after going down a water slide, and even during intimacy, are from labial tears or vaginal wall lacerations, not hymen injuries. Additionally, the likelihood of you having an absent hymen without any other GU abnormalities, e.g. Turner syndrome, malarianogenesis, etc., is vanishingly small, to the point that I'm not sure it's ever been reported. If you have a normal female body part, then you have a hymen, period. This is a topic that I'm rather passionate about because well-meaning women very frequently spread these myths around with complete confidence. I was born without a hymen, or I must have broken mine when I was a kid, are extremely common reactions in response to, for example, stories about purity testing, which is obviously also complete bullshit for reasons as stated above. But I think it is very important for people to better understand their own bodies. Answer: scrolled for too long to find this. It's one of my pet frustrations too. Apparently in jury cases for child intimacy assault, they have to explain this to the jury because people suggest getting a doctor to look at a child's female body part to find out if someone had penetrative intimacy with her. It's wild that people still think there's some physical freshness seal that pops, and you can tell if a woman has had penetrative intimacy or not, and it has messed up real-world consequences. Story 20. Not scientific, but historical. Marie Antoinette never said, "Let them eat cake," and it pisses me off when people say otherwise. Story 21. That nuclear power is dangerous when in reality it's one of the safest sources of energy that we have. Story 22. You could probably pick any fact relating to the fitness industry, and it would be a myth. The one that pisses me off the most is that carbs make you fat. Answer: there is a degree of truth in the sense that they do produce more net ATP per gram than, say, protein. Really, carbohydrates are just a fancy term for sugar. Basically, everything we eat gets converted into energy in the form of ATP. Anything in excess of what is needed gets stored as fat. ATP is produced from glucose via cellular respiration, and practically everything we eat eventually gets converted by our bodies into glucose. The more steps between our food and glucose, the less net ATP we derive from it, since it costs ATP to actually break it down. The less net ATP, the less excess there is to store as fat. Glucose and fructose are monosaccharides. There are no steps needed. They can be consumed directly. This is why high fructose corn syrup is so bad for you. Sucrose, table sugar, is a dimer of glucose and fructose and is only one step away. What is commonly referred to as carbohydrates is basically sugar polymers, long chains of sugars that are bonded together. It's still only one step to cleave off an individual monosaccharide. So in that sense, they aren't that much different from table sugar. Proteins, on the other hand, are very difficult for our body to turn into glucose. Depending on the type of protein, it can take multiple steps, or it may not be possible at all. In other words, our bodies are very efficient at turning sugars and carbs into fat. Proteins, not so much. This still doesn't mean it's healthy to go on a low no-carb diet. Story 23. That the color of blood is actually blue? It just turns red when exposed to oxygen. Yeah, people think this. Story 24. Glass is actually just a slow liquid. This was an unfortunate misunderstanding of two phenomena. One, glass isn't a perfectly amorphous solid. It has zero crystalline structure, which some people took to mean it's not actually solidified. Secondly, very old glass used to be made in such a way that it cooled before becoming perfectly flat. These imperfections were misinterpreted to be running due to extreme time frames. Story 25. Flu vaccine will give you the flu, or that having a vaccine and still getting the illness later in time proves they don't work. The idiots ain't gonna eliminate us all. Answer. My boss, woman in her 50s, recently said she doesn't get the flu shots because once she got it and got the stomach flu from it right after. I kindly interjected that influenza that we are seasonally vaccinated for is a respiratory illness. Stomach flu is actually not a flu. It's usually norovirus, foodborne illness, etc. Regardless of the reasoning, there is no stomach flu vaccine. Well, babies, I believe, get the rotavirus immunization, but that doesn't last to adulthood. She looked at me like I was stupid. Story 26. Consuming a lot of vitamin C when you're sick. Studies that showed it lessened colds were only for specific groups like elderly people. If you feel a cold coming, you should take some vitamin N and zinc, as these are really what supports the immune system. Story 27. The whole alpha male discourse, even when disavowed by the coiner of the term, idiots still love it and make it their whole personality. Vaccines and autism. Ugh. Story 28. The belief that people have individual learning styles like visual, audio, and kinesthetic learners. Total neuromyth. Story 29. Eating eggs are bad for you. Wait, you should eat eggs. Nope. Now you're not supposed to eat eggs. It's okay, you can eat eggs now. Scientists have been back and forth on eating eggs. Story 30. Taking antibiotics every time you get flu symptoms. The flu is a virus and antibiotics don't do shoot for viruses. Antibiotics are now being sold in home remedy kits without any real oversight of a physician. The overuse of antibiotics is creating antibiotic-resistant strains of microorganisms. Story 31. Lemmings commit mass tragic end. No, people just chucked them off a cliff and called it a documentary. Story 32. I'm an educator, and the number of times I hear colleagues mention the long-debunked concept of learning styles makes me want to stick a spork in my eye. Story 33. That a flu vaccination causes you to get the flu. When you feel ick after a flu shot, it's your immune response saying, wait a minute, it's a eliminate virus, so no way can you get the flu. Story 34. So many people, even science reporters, think that Schrödinger's cat thought experiment means that the cat is in a weird state of being alive and dead simultaneously. It's not. It is either alive or dead, never both. It's just that the probabilities, which most people don't understand, are equal until you open the box. Story 35. Mercury in retrograde. It's crazy that we've known for centuries that this phenomenon is just a quirk in perspective, and yet fans of astrology still insist that it can somehow have an effect. Story 36. It's an apt metaphor for society's subdued reaction to gradual change. But frogs will totally jump out of gradually boiling water. Story 37. The universe is a volume of space which has a property that nothing can go faster through space than the speed of light. To be fair, this is how it's often taught because the subtleties are complicated. The reality is that the universe is a space-time that has the property that everything in it moves at the speed of light. You and I just don't notice because we're moving at the speed of light forward in time. This is what scientists mean when they say going faster than the speed of light doesn't make any sense. Nothing in the universe can move at any speed that isn't c. This also neatly explains why people moving in different reference frames disagree on the passage of time. Your speed through space and time, always has to add up to c. Story 38. That humans evolved from apes. We share a common ancestor, but we didn't come from the apes. Much like how you share a common relative with your cousins, but you didn't come from your cousins. Story 39. That scientific research is a slam dunk argument. Yes, someone wrote a paper that says X doesn't prove anything. At best, it provides evidence of something, but that's a best case scenario. And don't just say there was a paper that showed X. You have to look at who were the authors, what were their declared conflicts, what are their institutions, what were their methods, does their conclusion make sense? A lot of garbage gets published. Story 40. That you must not swim for 2 hours after you ate something. I think this is busted now. In my country, people are still screaming to their kids to not go into the water after they had half a banana. Story 41. Loopy Grandma UTI. Stop anchoring, it's lazy. You're doing your patients a disservice. Signed, an infectious disease physician. Story 42. Left brain versus right brain. Everyone uses all parts of their brains, and complex functions like art and math require multiple parts on both sides working together. Story 43. Shark attacks are super rare. You're more likely to die by lightning, meteor, train crash, etc. than by shark attack. Those sample sizes are stupid. You know who has zero risk of being attacked by a great white? Some poor bastard getting struck by lightning in Bangladesh, Bristol, or Bogota. You know who has a pretty fudge high risk? The very small number of idiots fishing about off the coast of New South Wales every morning like pretending to be a wounded seal is a perfectly safe form of exercise. I've got zero chance of a shark attack reading my book in the garden, Linda. Story 44. Storing car batteries on cement will flatten them. They have a plastic casing, no electrons or ions flow through it. You can keep one semi submerged in water, it won't matter. Story 45. That race exists in human beings when it never has. Between the 1700s to the mid-1900s, many scientists tried proving that racial categories are natural to humans. Science stopped trying to prove that about 70 years ago. But I'd say most people today still believe that race still scientifically exists and is more than a social construct, that there is something physical there designating black from white, etc. But geneticists today prove that two people of the same race can easily have more genetic variation between them as two people of a different race. I'm a PhD student in sociocultural anthropology, and teaching this to my students blows their minds. But most of them struggle to accept it, despite the evidence against race as a scientific truth, which I think says something about how strongly we're culturally coded to see race in people when it's never existed. Source: see John Marks, 1996, Science and Race. Story 46. that there's a magical age when our brains finish developing. The way they define it, developing, just means change, and there's significant overlap between developing and decay, where we start getting worse at some things. The exact age people quote tends to have more to do with the age of their ex's new, hotter partner than science. Answer: adding to this, the specific idea that our brains stop developing at 25 is a complete misunderstanding of the study the data stems from. The study was observing brain development in teens and young adults and ended when the test subjects were 25. That doesn't mean that development stopped at that age, just that they ceased collecting data past 25. Story 47. I heard the blood is blue inside the vein just the other day. Blood is blue until it's exposed to oxygen. Are you breathing? Is your blood not oxygenated currently? It was a hill they chose to die on, so I stopped the discussion. Story 48. That high sugar consumption causes diabetes in otherwise healthy people. You need other factors in order to get diabetes, like obesity, for type 2 at least. Sugar can cause obesity, but not always. Story 49. You took whatever stimulant and felt whatever kind of way? Dude, you probably have ADHD. Behavioral response to stimulants has no value in diagnosing ADHD. Story 50. The alpha male wolf theory. The original paper was found to be faulty and was retracted. Yet the fudge manosphere took the concept and made it the toxic fiasco we have to deal with now. Story 51. The alpha dog theory. The guy who initially introduced came back later and said, "Yo, so I was wrong." Turns out, if you grab a bunch of rando wolves and throw them in a new enclosure nowhere near any of their native environments, they're going to act a little weird. The wolves he had observed had been unrelated wolves in some form of captivity. Later, he got funding or something, but basically he went out and was able to discreetly observe wolves in their native packs and environments. In reality, wolves function just like any other family. Mom, dad, in-laws, offspring, cousins, etc. Closest thing to an alpha is whoever sires the most pups, but even then, they don't behave anything like what he observed. To his credit, when he realized his error, he immediately started saying he was wrong and that what he wrote had no merit, even asked for alpha to be taken out of the newer prints. Only reason dominance works with training dogs is the same way you can grab your kid, shove them into their room, and scream in their face to do their homework. Sure, they might get straight A's, but that doesn't mean you're a good parent. It only has a real place in stuff like combat, like police and military dogs, because you need the dog to be aggressive, but you can't risk it getting out of control. But even then, they rely on positive reinforcement, which has been proven to be much better. This is also why the dog training world reviles Cesar Millan. He promotes an outdated and grankle dangerous method of dog training, even though he's been told time and time again that it has no scientific credibility. Sorry, taters. Your alpha wolf spirit animal is actually a loving, caring, and involved dad who respects his mates and helps out as an equal partner and can still rip your face off all the same. Story 52. Lactic acid is not what makes your muscles burn or feel fatigued. It's actually a substitute for oxygen that energizes your muscles when you're using them and burning oxygen at a deficit. It drains in as much time as it takes to secrete and gets processed into glucose once it hits your liver. Fatigue and soreness just comes from muscle breakdown. Fatigue while the muscles are damaged, soreness while they heal back stronger. But lactic saturation can have symptoms associated with exercise. Too much, and your body tries to expel the excess. That's where nausea comes from when you push yourself too hard. So don't hold your breath when you're lifting. Don't hyperventilate. Let the acid flow. Without it, we wouldn't be able to do work, or at least more work than our available oxygen could supply. Answer: I had a friend many years ago who was in a pretty bad car accident that fudged up her hips and lower back. She would start each day fine, but the longer she sat, we had desk jobs, the worse the pain would get. She would go for weekly massages to help loosen up her hip muscles to help deal with it. During one particularly rough session, I think she missed the previous week's appointment, she was brought to tears by the pain as the therapist was working out a pretty bad knot in her back. She said it got bad, then really bad, then excruciating, and then basically all at once it went away, and she promptly threw up and passed out. Therapists said it was likely the lactic acid release from the muscle relaxing after having been rigidly tight for a week. Not sure how true that is, but it sounds reasonable. Story 53. That determining your learning style and then only trying to learn that way is effective. It's not. Repeated research has debunked this, or teachers giving students a survey to determine their style. Blah. Dual coding, learning through multiple modalities, is effective. But siloing yourself into being a visual learner and only trying to take in knowledge that way is handicapping you. It's the education myth that won't die. Story 54. A lot of women were told throughout our lives to wash our hair as little as possible, but experts actually recommend every 1-2 days, with caveats that might swing a day in either direction depending on lifestyle and hair type. The hairstylist for my wedding actually made sure I relayed to my girls that don't show up with too clean hair for an updo. Basically just means don't wash it right before you come. She said she had too many bridesmaids show up with hair that was so dirty it had to be washed on the spot because it was going to look greasy once pulled up, exposing the roots. I know folks who play intense outdoor sports in the humid southern heat on a daily basis, who will go 5-6 days without washing. Story 55. That women's fertility crashes at the age of 30 and men's never do. Turns out the early studies that were conducted on the subject weren't taking into account the age relationship between the participants, where the majority of the women had older male partners. Even a layperson can see how that might be an issue. Men aren't at constant peak fertility, nobody is, and older men can impact the viability of a pregnancy regardless of the age and fitness of the woman. They also didn't try to mitigate their own confirmation bias, as they were clearly already operating under the assumption that fertility problems were almost exclusively a result of something being wrong with the woman. It's a really annoying misconception that makes people think their misogynistic comments about the clock ticking are validated, when in reality they're making a fool of themselves for several reasons. They just don't know it because nobody cares about research that disproves their preconceived notions. Story 56. That 18-year-olds are the most fertile and is the best time biologically to have children. Teen pregnancy is still dangerous and comes with a lot of risks. Story 57. The left brain versus right brain myth. The division of functionality is way more complex than math logic versus art feelings. Story 58. You eat or swallow 8 spiders a year in your sleep. The irony being that this fact was made up in 1993 specifically to show that people will believe any claim they read online, and they still do all these years later. Story 59. Vitamin C prevents colds. Studies have shown that it doesn't. In fact, research has shown that vitamin supplements can be dangerous. They are regulated as food, so they don't have to be tested like medications. Story 60. Pluto isn't a planet. This is false and propaganda. My name is Jerry, and I am for Pluto Planetary Progress Loans. Story 61. If you take all the capillaries, veins, and arteries of a person and put them in a line, they would go around the world 2.5 times, 100 km. In actual fact, it would be more 19 km. Myth is over 100 years old and was recently busted by a new paper on the topic. Good video on YouTube about this. Story 62. Our brain is at the peak of evolution. Not at all. Bigger brain need more resources to maintain. If bigger brain does not bring more survivability reproduction, it's a disadvantage and get eliminated. Evolutionary peak efficiency for our brain is at the edge of minimal requirements for not dying from dumb things. Story 63. Alternative medicine is a marketing category, not an evidential one. It's not medicine. If an alternative treatment is proven to work through controlled testing, it gets absorbed into mainstream medicine and stops being alternative because demonstrated, peer-reviewed. Evidence moves it into the actual medical toolkit. If a treatment stays alternative, it's because it failed to demonstrate reliable effectiveness when tested. As Tim Minchin put it, you know what they call alternative medicine that's been proved to work? Medicine. Story 64. The left brain versus right brain myth is still everywhere. People think the right side of the brain is responsible for creativity and the left side for logic, and that everyone has a dominant side. And in reality, both of those skills involve multiple brain regions in both hemispheres, and we don't have a dominant brain side like we have a dominant hand, unless there is some kind of pathology causing that. Story 65. That exposing kids to viruses like chickenpox or measles at a young age is good for their immune system. Even exposing adults to viruses like the flu, it doesn't strengthen your immune system. It makes it weaker and damages organs. Story 66. That male seahorses get pregnant. No, they don't. They have a pouch, like a kangaroo. The female still has and lays the eggs. The male simply carries the eggs in his pouch. Story 67. Hilariously, this one is like a 2-for-1 of misinformation. Chemical imbalance being the cause of depression. Wait, hear me out. Clinical depression is definitely a real thing, and antidepressants work for some people. It's just the mechanism by which they work probably isn't what we thought it was. But it's been accepted wisdom for so long that a lot of people, including doctors, still think chemical imbalance is what causes depression, myth 1. While idiots stumble across these headlines and see chemical imbalance, not cause of depression, never actually read the article, and assume it means science says depression, not real, and your nephew really only needed fresh air and exercise like you thought. Myth 2. Here's a good article to better understand the whole sordid state of affairs. The serotonin theory of depression, how the media got it all wrong. So serotonin imbalance is probably not what causes depression. It was only ever hypothesized that that was how antidepressants work. But upon learning this new information, a lot of people assumed it disproved there being any physical cause at all. I guess these people forgot that the brain does a fudge load more than just balance chemicals. I was inspired to post this because of Myth 2 being posted elsewhere in this thread, LOL. Story 68, calories in, calories out for weight loss. This is a gross simplification of the complexity between nutrition, fitness, and the complex biomechanical machine that is the human body. Answer: A. It's a simplification but still accurate. The human body is complex and adds a lot of variables to that simple calculation, but the base idea holds. Personally, I think people thinking it is completely false is more harmful. Definitely known a couple folks personally and seen some on the internet that claim this statement is BS because they added their calories in and subtracted calories out and still didn't lose weight or even gained weight. More often than not, I'm willing to be they just calculated something wrong. So many people forget to add calories from things like cooking oil, sauces, snacks, and drinks, or underestimate a serving size. On the other hand, they will overestimate how many calories they expend. Bottom line, if you leave yourself healthy room for error in your calorie counts to virtually ensure you are in a true calorie deficit, you will lose weight. Thermodynamics dictates it. Story 69. Apparently, that depression is caused by a chemical imbalance. So that's something I found out is not true today. Story 70. Cameras give you good vision. Misinformation disseminated by Great Britain during WW2 to hide the development of radar. It's so effective, it's still a hugely popular belief today. Story 71. That being trans is a choice. Okay, time for Chaucer 345's well-cited and detailed explanation about why being trans isn't a choice. Firstly, trans people are physically different from others of their intimacy assigned at birth. While we have not developed a specific test for being trans, and we don't know the specific genes in most cases, gender incongruence is heritable, and we have evidence it's frequently tied to alleles associated with the body's steroid production. There is also good evidence of brain structural differences. About 50 experience phantom sensation for organs they weren't born with, which is typically a neurological issue. Secondly, I have seen no reputable studies showing that any other type of therapy or intervention for trans people has resulted in them feeling comfortable in their own skin. There's no good evidence I can find that talk therapy, substances, electroshock, or anything else consistently makes trans people feel okay in their default bodies. I have found evidence that the stuff people have tried has caused immense harm, but that is tangential. Thirdly, gender-affirming care has a large body of evidence showing it makes people feel better. As always, Wikipedia serves as a source of sources. Transgender healthcare, Wikipedia. On the flip side, there is a large campaign of misinformation trying to discredit it, which people would not need to fund if the facts were on their side. As always, Wikipedia serves as a source of sources. Transgender healthcare misinformation, Wikipedia. So to summarize, you have a group of people who feel miserable who did not choose to feel the way they do. And the only treatment currently known to make them feel better is gender-affirming care. Thus, a trans person has about as much choice in transitioning as a person with major depressive disorder has about taking SSRIs. Technically, they can, but they will be miserable if they refuse treatment. Story 72. The double slit experiment. No, your conscious observation didn't cause the particles to act differently. Measuring them did. Even on Reddit, I see the observer's effect misunderstood. Answer: can you explain the difference between observation and measurement? Don't we do some form of measurement by default while observing? When you observe a cup, you instantly notice if it's empty or full, or stages between. Honest question, because I use this analogy all of the time when describing the role of a project manager. They have zero authority apart from observation and measurement. The project is in a state of superposition until the project manager calls a status meeting. I refer to them as Schrödinger's project managers or box openers. Story 73. It's geometry if that counts. Circles have one side. They told me this as a kid. A triangle has 3 points, so it has 3 sides. A square has 4 points, so it has 4 sides. A circle only has one side. Wrong. All two-dimensional shapes are theoretical in three-dimensional space, and a circle would be a shape created by an infinite amount of points with either no sides or an infinite amount of theoretical sides. If you view a square versus an octagon, the octagon is more similar to a circle. If you kept adding points and lines, it would continue to be more similar to a circle. With an infinite amount of lines and points, it would be either a circle or a one-dimensional point. Story 74. A few years ago, my mother told me that cold water boils faster than hot water. When she told me that, I was running a chemistry lab for research scientists. I explained to her exactly why this was not true. Story 75. Spinach is high in iron. Iron due to a decimal point mistake. Kind of like carrots improve your vision. A story made up by the British to conceal the fact that they were using that new technology, radar. Story 76. There is still a shockingly high amount of people who think you have to wait 30 minutes after eating before swimming. Also, a shockingly high number of people still believe cracking your knuckles can cause arthritis. Story 77. Astrology seems to be making a pretty fudge-strong comeback amongst young people. Signs, along with rising and falling or whatever, seem to be pretty popular. Okay, idiot, do you also believe in Jesus, the Tooth Fairy, and Krampus? Story 78. We came from monkeys. We share a common ancestor with monkeys. Monkeys are not our ancestors. Not only are they wrong, but the person making this claim is almost always attempting to smugly disparage some religious person. Spreading misinformation is like the exact opposite of the point of being an atheist. If you're going to be smug, please be correct. Story 79. That 98.6 is an accurate average body temperature. It's not. The guy who determined that used a bunch of flawed methods. Story 80. According to all known laws of aviation, the bumblebee should not be able to fly. We know how they do it. Toilet bowls swirl the opposite direction in the southern hemisphere because of the Coriolis effect. No, they don't. Story 81. The belief that soups can only be enjoyed during the winter months because it's hot outside any other time. Fact, you can enjoy soup indoors with the AC on, just like any other warm meal you'd make year-round. Also in the winter, you're still eating indoors with the heater on. The logic is fudge stupid. Story 82. That the human brain does not fully develop until 25, and that we only use 10 of our brain. Scientists will laugh at you if you were to say any of these two things. Story 83. Trex being fluffy, feathery as a turkey. A lot of dinosaurs were covered in feathers. Yes, that isn't up for debate. But for Trex specifically, there is no proof they had noticeable amount of feathers, even if they had any. Story 84. That sugar makes kids hyper. I know, but apparently studies have shown that there is no physical reason why kids who eat sugar get hyper. Story 85. Mass gets heavier as its speed approaches the speed of light. In fact, the energy term of EMC2 goes up. Imagine a special relativity gamma in front of the MC2 term, A gamma MC2, but the mass stays the same. Story 86. We can put unwanted stuff on a rocket and dispose of it in the sun. It is very hard to get to the sun. Story 87. The bullshit explanation regarding the butterfly effect. The plotted points look like a butterfly. That nonsense about a butterfly flapping its wings is just that. It's nonsense. All the butterfly effect means is that small variations in complex systems can lead to complex variations in the results. Story 88. That the A virus is going to sniff out the fact that I walked outside with wet hair and come swooping in out of nowhere to suddenly infect me. I get that cold air can dry out your nasal passages and put stress on your immune system and maybe make you slightly more likely to get sick when encountering the actual germs. But the idea that cold weather becoming sick is so mind-bogglingly stupid to me. Story 89. There's a lot of myths and misinformation regarding menstruation. That the blood comes from the egg, that menstruation is related to the moon cycle, period syncing, etc. Story 90. The myth that people can be allergic to iodine and therefore can't have iodinated IV contrast for CT scans. Iodine is an essential mineral needed to produce thyroid hormone. The allergy is actually due to other components of the contrast. And add to that the myth that if you're allergic to shellfish, it's because of the iodine. Story 91. 95 of people who lose weight gain it back and more. This was based on a single poorly designed study that people interpreted to mean don't even bother trying to lose weight because it rarely ever works when the reality, and the original authors of the study also found this to be true, is that regain only happens when you resume old habits. People who make complete and total lifestyle changes, reduce caloric intake and regular exercise, can and do manage to keep even large amounts of weight off long term. Story 92. I think the vast majority of the people think that Bernoulli accurately represents how lift is produced, and that electrons are traveling from the power company to your house and back again at near the speed of light, or that electrons orbit around an atom's nucleus in a circular orbit like a satellite. Story 93. Human tongue has different zones for different flavors. My daughter learned this recently in primary school. Story 94. If you look straight at the sun and counting till 10, I think, you'll be blind forever. Same goes for the stars, also the moon. You'll get verruca vulgaris. Story 95. Drawing on yourself will not give you ink poisoning. They did a study several years ago. I learned about it in high school in like 2017, 2018, but I don't remember when the actual study was from. And you would have to drink several gallons of Sharpie ink in like under an hour in order to be poisoned from it. Story 96. Blind as a bat. In 2007, this was debunked as science got better, but a lot of people don't know that and still think bats are blind. Story 97. The London Underground is a terrorist organization. Okay, it's slightly off topic, but this line from the film A Fish Called Wanda always makes me chuckle. Story 98. Big Bang singularity. It hasn't been a part of the theory for like 4 decades, but I still see it mentioned often. Story 99. I have 2. You must drink 8 glasses of water a day, and stretching before exercise is good. The first is BS, and the second is actually harmful. Story 100. Another one is that the multiverse is just a theory or fiction. It's considered the best theory in physics we have. Objects in this universe are demonstrably affected by things not in it. Story 101. Speaking of prostates, as someone down the line was, many people still believe women don't have one. They do. It's just much smaller and has its own name, the Skene's gland. Story 102. Our senses still trick us that matter around is full, AG. A jug is full of something, but fullness is a joke. Emptiness is the roaring reality. Story 103. That cold is a property of things. In truth, there is no such thing as cold. There is only the degree of heat present. Story 104. It's not scientific if it's a myth. Perhaps a better way to phrase it would be, what changes in scientific thinking has not been accepted by many of the public. Story 105. It's all relative. It is true for a good many things, like scaling up and downsizing, but not other things like, well, I guess this is the complicated part about talking about how oranges are different than apples without using any common word to describe the difference. But the main concept of the stereotype does appear to be sound and wholesome. I'm an actual retired engineer, not a fictional one. I did the work that resulted in those numbers on my SSA earnings record. Even the series of zeros in the middle before the forward/looking line that signified going into the black before the liquidation sale. Rachel's bike store boss. The city is complaining about my liquidation sale. I told them that we are always liquidating. Story 106. That humans evolved from modern apes, that survival of the fittest means survival of the strongest, and that evolution has a goal. Story 107. That you have to drink 2 liters or 8 glasses of water a day. You don't. A post-WW2 prisoner refeeding study found that the average male needs 2 liters of fluids per day. A significant proportion of that is supplied by your food. The best indicator of hydration is that your urine should be pale to almost clear yellow. Story 108. I just had some guy on Reddit tell me that oil is a renewable resource. It's called abiotic oil, and it is a freaky conspiracy theory. Story 109. Pretty sure the if bit by a poisonous or venomous snake, suck the venom poison out, was proven false, and you absolutely should not do that, lol. Story 110. Airborne contagions. The medical establishment refused to accept the findings of particulate physicists. They study air particles, not atomic particles, for years, insisting dogma from decades prior that turned out to be a bad transcription was correct. Despite the WHO finally accepting physical reality, they still don't usually address it, nor do most countries' hospital protocols, much less building regulations. The title talks about COVID, but the fight when they were trying to get this recognized as major vector were for viruses like flu and RSV. It's a fudge travesty that in addition to no real change in paid sick days, which had also been pushed as both a health and economic advantage for decades pre-COVID, most countries haven't even provided subsidies or tax exemptions for improved ventilation filtration systems, much less required new any kind of standard. Story 111. Not sure if this was ever based on science, but primary schools in the UK taught that the tongue's taste buds are split between 4 zones, each covering sweet, sour, salty, and bitter. Story 112. If you are dying of thirst in the desert, saving and drinking your own urine can help you survive. This myth continues to persist because it contains kernels of truth. Urine does contain potential hydration, but only the crystal clear style of pee when the person is very, very hydrated at the time of excretion. But it also always contains waste products that our body is intentionally getting rid of. That can make you sick, so it's useless in a survival scenario. As you get more dehydrated, the water content to waste content ratio gets exponentially worse, making the potential benefits not worth the definite downsides. And the problem compounds quickly if urine was the liquid ingested in the first place that was then digested and excreted. So it's a dumb catch-22 style Ouroboros of logic. Urine can be hydrating, but only if plenty of water is available and being chugged regularly. In which case, you wouldn't need the extra hydration drinking your pee would give you, not to mention the problems the waste products would still be giving you. You're far better conserving what little water you have to stretch over as long a time as possible. By the time the water runs out, your pee is basically poison. There are also a lot of false positives of its efficacy because of stories of people lost in the desert and drinking their pee and eventually being rescued and surviving. So they think that proves that it works. But the science says they survived despite drinking pee, not because of it. They were almost certainly hastening their own demise and just got lucky. Sorry for the gross info dump. I just happened to fall down a rabbit hole of reading about this subject after watching Better Call Saul. Story 113. Thu earth is flat cause everything around here is flat. Mu floor is flat. Mu driveway is flat. Mu height is flat. So will flat. Story 114. That people have learning styles, i.e. auditory, kinesthetic, and visual. People have ways they prefer to learn, but it doesn't really matter in tests of recall. Learning styles is just another excuse students will use for why they can't pay attention or learn something. Quit teaching learning styles to kids. It's doing much more harm than good. Story 115. For me, chiropractors help when I have back neck pain, but there are other natural remedies for other stuff never has. Story 116. That the definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting different results. As if such a broad term could be defined by a specific action. Bonus points if they say it's according to Einstein, because apparently an astrophysicist is an expert on mental illness and psychology. Story 117. Eat until you feel full. Great, but some of us either don't produce enough leptin or do not detect it, in which case we don't feel full. Answer: yes, this. I'm surprised to see this is getting downvotes. There are a few hormonal chemical nutrient-related reasons, including the one you listed, why a body might not feel satiated after eating what should be a healthy amount of food for their specific body. These reasons can then lead to overeating, sometimes on a large scale, if a person dealing with these issues is convinced that they need to eat until they are full. Story 118. Caloric theory, energy is a cognitive model. It's not real stuff. Things don't have energy. They can be described with energy, and it's a useful idea. Story 119. Left unchecked, an increasing human population will strip the earth of resources. I notice that animals don't do this. Story 120. What scientific certainty is considered myth by so many? Climate change. Kyoto Protocol was 1989. Story 121. That COVID was a natural occurrence from a bat in a Chinese wet market. It's been shown already that it was gain-of-function research that escaped, also was funded by Tony Fauci and the U.S. government. Story 122. That kidney stones inside the kidney, so non-obstructing, do not cause pain. While for some this may be the case, but for many it is not. I really wish more medical personnel would educate themselves more on this subject if they have a patient with kidney stones. Story 123. Lactic acid does not cause muscle soreness, and we've known that since the 80s. Yet, I still hear people say it. Story 124. I've found that many people genuinely think of eugenicist concepts as completely functional, meaningful science when they just are not. Even putting morals aside regarding how repugnant eugenics is, the whole enterprise is just kind of fucking stupid. Story 125. If you consider social sciences, I would say meritocracy. It had been shown again and again that every generation of meritocracy end up in several generations of oligarchy. You could have moments of meritocracy, especially when the noble class is well. Not the best educated out there to govern, dedicated their energy to party rather than managing. But eternal meritocracy is Disneyland for sociology. It always ends up in an aristocracy that ends up in oligarchy. If you are talking about natural sciences, you would say that evolution explains the origin of life, and does not. It only explains how life would divert. We still have no clue nor paradigm to create our first cell. So, it might be gum. It may come from space, or it might have originated here. Story 126. So many people still think nuclear power is a safe power source. They don't understand that nuclear power plants have to be so safe because nuclear power is so unsafe. The worst case can heavily affect a whole continents for years. Compared to that, the worst case of other power plants are a joke. TLDR, safe power plant, safe power source. Story 127. The Big Bang. Believing it is literally no different than believing in God, that Jesus rose from the dead, or that Izanagi Banyamai dipped his sword into the water, and the drops that fell off formed the Japan archipelago. Oh, and while I'm here, that a bat's blood mixed with a pangolin's saliva and some gerbil poo-poo, and that's why some people couldn't hold their loved ones when they died in the hospital. Story 128. Reddit is the source of knowledge and enlightenment for all things. I get all my medical information and guidance from Reddit for sure. Story 129. Mice love cheese. Mice will eat anything they can find with nutritional value, but they don't even like cheese, really. They'd rather eat fruit or candy. Story 130. Albert Einstein never failed math in school. He mastered differential and integral calculus by age 14 and consistently received top grades in all his math and science classes. Story 131. Before Columbus, people, everyone thought the world was flat, that the earth is round, has been known for thousands of years, and multiple cultures came to this conclusion independently. Story 132. That a woman found a finger in her Wendy's chili, she later pled guilty and was sent to jail because it was all faked. Story 133. Dogs only see in black and white and gray, which is a not true. They see in yellow, blue, and gray. We can see colors because we have 6 million cone photoreceptor cells, but dogs have 20, which would roughly be 1/200 to 0, which in contrast only produces blue and yellow. They have 2 cones in their eyes, which produce only yellow and blue, contrary to humans, which have 3 rings that produce red, yellow, and blue. Eat it. I see some people may not understand about green. Yes, dogs can see blue and yellow, which will thusly make green, but green is actually yellowish. Gray to them, the limited color perception dogs have is called dichromatic vision. Eat. Grass may not even be green to our knowledge. It is, but scientists may not have even found the animal with the most rings. The most at the current moment is 16, the mantis shrimp. All the colors we see could be a lie. We will never truly know what color anything is, because if we think about it, it's like saying that if you put 20 people in a room, some are colorblind and some aren't. You put a blue object in with them. Some can see blue, some can see purple. They will never know who's colorblind unless someone tells them it's like us. We will never know what color grass is. The colors we see may be a lie. Sorry if none of that made sense. Answer. It's true that dogs don't have vision anywhere as good as humans, but they can literally smell in 3D. Humans can generally only make out 1 smell at a time, maybe 2 or 3 at most, but dogs can track 50 smells at the same time. Watch a dog go into a room they haven't been in recently. They'll have their nose high up in the air, sniffing out everything. Story 134. Myth. You need to wait 24 hours before reporting a missing person. Truth. No, you don't. The sooner you report a missing person, the higher the chances are of them being found alive. Answer. This one drives me nuts because literal lives are in the balance. And the worst is that police will perpetuate this and wing it like, oh, they are adults. They might come back. It's literally mostly over paperwork and police resources. The amount of time, energy involved in filing report, looking, etc. for someone that wasn't really missing is annoying. Story 135. Up until a few months ago, I still believed that if someone was HIV positive, they could essentially develop full-blown AIDS at any moment without warning, and any bodily fluid could pass the virus onto someone else, so it would be very dangerous to even so much as share a toothbrush with them. That's what I was taught as a kid by parents and teachers, so it's what I believed. The concept of someone taking a pill until the virus becomes undetectable in their system blew my mind. Answer. I know someone who had HIV and didn't even know until he got C. diff. By that time, it was already AIDS. He lives a normal life with the help of medications, but he's never been undetectable. Before he knew about his diagnosis, diagnosis, he ended up giving it to another woman. She has HIV, but has been undetectable for years. Lesson here? Get tested, especially if you engage in high-risk behaviors. And for certain people, they have PrEP available, which is a medicine you take every day to prevent HIV infection. Story 136. Victorian women had ribs removed in order to corset their waist even tinier. There is zero historical evidence for that. Do people even know how risky surgery was in the Victorian era? Germ theory had only become scientifically accepted near the end of the era, and it took longer for the public to accept it. That surgery would pretty much be a passing sentence. But people want to reinforce the narrative that all corsets were oppressive and sexist. Bonus, really only high society women would tight-lace their corsets for limited periods of time, X for their wedding or special event. Before 1840s, tight-lacing wasn't even possible because eyelets were hand-bound and couldn't put up with the strain. So any media depicting tight-lacing before that time are just lying. This is a topic I'm very passionate about. Answer: corsets in general get a bad rap. Worn correctly, they were reasonably comfortable and didn't do any of the bone organ deformation horror pictures you see. Period TV movies portrays corsets as worn directly over bare skin, usually either because it's sexier or to highlight the marks when it comes off. But normally they were worn over light underwear, for obvious reasons, to prevent marks and discomfort. Story 137. That the band AC/DC made 11 albums that sound exactly the same, according to guitarist Angus Young, who was sick of people making that claim. In fact, we've made 12 albums that sound exactly the same. Story 138. That dietary fat is the source of body fat. I know most people still think it's true because we still have the low-fat versions of every food that we've had since the 80s. Story 139. That learning multiple languages at once will hinder your child's intelligence. Sure, when they're young, they'll make mistakes and take longer to sort out vocabulary, but in the end, they'll be better for knowing more than one. Sometimes they'll even do better in grammar lessons, etc., because they have a richer understanding of how language works. Answer: I now thank my mom for forcing me to read the Azbuka when I was little. Every single night, she made me recite poems and read stories out loud in Russian. She never forced me to speak it. Actually, she would speak to me in Russian, and I'd reply in Spanish because I was lazy, but I understood everything. Later, when I decided to speak fluently, I took a few classes, and after a couple of months in practice, I could read really fast and speak fluently. You just forget the word you want to use when you don't practice it often, and it happens to native speakers as well. I'll definitely be doing the same to my kids with every language I know. Story 140. That if you swallow gum, it stays in your stomach for 5-7 years. This obviously is not true. While it'll probably make you constipated if you swallow a lot of gum very frequently, it goes through the body just like everything else. Edited it to say gum. Fudge autocorrect. Story 141. That 30 years olds were considered to be old in the Middle Ages. The reason that the average, generally since that era was several centuries long and different countries had different circumstances. Life expectancy was 30 was because the infant mortality rate was much higher than it was today. If you survived past infancy, you could reasonably expect to live to 60-70. Story 142. It's dangerous to wake a sleepwalker. Yeah, no, though it's advised not to wake a sleepwalker, as that could make them disoriented and confused. It's not actually dangerous. Some people believe that waking them up could cause a heart attack, which is not true. Story 143. That everything you toss in the recycling bin actually gets recycled. Be advised, this info will probably ruin your day if you actually care about the environment. Story 144. GMOs are inherently bad. It's false. Edit 1. As every invention of humanity, it can be used badly or it can be used to do good. But again, it's not inherently bad. And I believe if used with even a little bit of ethics behind them, they can do wonders. So plus before writing under yes, but first ask yourselves if it could be avoided with a little bit of legislation based on the concept of not being a male body part. And thank you everyone for all the interesting and helpful comments. Story 145. That frivolous lawsuits are rampant in the U.S. This was specifically fabricated by McDonald's lawyers in the infamous coffee burn incident, in which a restaurant consistently violated food safety laws after multiple warnings and ended up in an elderly woman receiving third-degree burns to her lap and genitals, requiring multiple skin grafts. McDonald's people spun it as a person too dumb to know that coffee would be hot and trying to bilk a corporation for easy money. Ultimately, The woman won her suit for medical costs, but McDonald's won the media social victory by planting the idea of frivolous lawsuits in the public consciousness, and the phrase has been consistently cited since then to cast doubt on anyone trying to hold corporations to account for shady practices that lead to harm. Answer: also, while she technically won over $2 million, the judge ruled that she was only entitled to $640, which wasn't what she received anyway because they settled out of court. All Stella Liebeck wanted was her medical costs covered. McDonald's refused, which led to the lawsuit. She wasn't some greedy monster looking for a payday, and she even admitted to partial fault since she was holding the cup between her legs when it spilled. The jury factored this into their calculation of damages. Story 146. The vomitorium was a place in Roman households where people would puke. It was actually the entrance or exit of amphitheaters and theaters. Story 147. Fruit juice is healthy. It contains just as much sugar as Coca-Cola, but it just happens to also contain some nutrients and a lot of flavorings. Story 148. 50 of marriages end in divorce. People often get this rate by dividing the number of weddings in a year by the number of divorces in a year, which doesn't take into account that those who divorced didn't get married that year. The rate did peak at around 41 about 40 years ago, but has been falling since then. Edit: I realize that I should mention this is an American-centric statistic. I'm not sure where this stands for other countries. Answer: this is actually kind of true though. The issue is how it's counted measured. It's the joke that marriages either end in passing or divorce. To calculate a successful marriage, you'd have to wait around for someone to die. So if Betty and Bob marry and live for 70 years, that's a successful marriage. You can't count it as a success until that moment. Plus, successful marriages can only be counted once per couple, whereas divorces can happen multiple times for a person. So Bob can get married and divorced 9 times. But on the 10th has a lifelong marriage. He skews the numbers so it looks more divorces than successful marriages. So the 50 divorce thing is really just a bad measure of how weddings, marriages, divorces are counted. Story 149. That GMOs are terrible for you, they aren't, and are actually just a better product that has been modified so it stays good longer and whatnot. Story 150. Poison ivy spreads through the rash it creates on people's skin and can be spread by scratching it, touching somebody with poison ivy. This is false. People believe that the fluid that is underneath the sores is the oil that is the same on the plant. First off, in what fudge world would the human body touch a plant and then be like, yes, I touched the oil, so now I must produce the poisonous oil? That's like saying if you get stung by a bee, you now will shoot out stingers. Anyway, that's not what it is at all. If you find yourself getting poison ivy showing up days after the initial rash sets in, it's probably because that's where the highest concentration of poison ivy oil was, and the other spots that are soon to appear just have a slower set-in rate. It can take up to 30 days for poison ivy to appear after contact. The only way you can get poison ivy by touching somebody else is if they still have the oil on them, like they haven't showered yet. It's much more likely that you would get it that way because everybody avoids people with the rash like the plague. Story 151. The Library of Alexandria being destroyed and losing tons of unique text in one event. Reality was that there were a few fires but no losses of special unique text, most likely, and the library itself declined over some time. Scribes copied so much work, and that's part of how we have so many works that survived anyway. Libraries were not rare in that time at all. Story 152. Left brain, right brain. Totally debunked. One that's starting to get taken apart is the idea that men and women's brains are structurally different. That one is turning out to be BS too. Brains are much like kidneys, livers, hearts. Maybe a size difference, but structurally identical. It's pretty fascinating. Answer: sorry, but you just reminded me of that Bo Burnham Left Brain, Right Brain song. I am the left brain, I am the left brain. I work really hard until my inevitable passing brain. You got a job to do, you better do it right. And the right way is with the left brains, mate. I like Oreo in Private Area, yes, in that order. And I cried at least for an hour after watching Toy Story 3. Woody, I am the right brain. I have feelings. I'm a little all over the place, but I'm lustful and trustful, and I'm looking for somebody to love. Or put my male body part in. Story 153. If you are loyal to your company will be loyal to you. Aid it. As long as you believe this, you will be exploited by the company you work for. The sooner you realize this, the sooner you will be on your way to doing something worth your time, such as starting your own e-commerce company or making money from ad revenue on YouTube. Story 154. That Mormonism isn't a cult. Spoiler alert, it's a cult. In it for 30 years and left it 4 years ago. Story 155. Most the backstory of Elon Musk. He's not qualified to be an engineer. His degrees concerning engineering are mostly bachelor's. Both his parents' families are rich, and he received money from both. He's not a co-founder of PayPal. After he attempted a hostile takeover, common for him, when 2 previous companies merged, he was fired after only 5 months, before the company became PayPal and went public. But he benefited from owning stock. He's not a founder of Tesla. That was another hostile takeover after the actual founders contacted Musk about fundraising. He's not an innovator. He steals other people's ideas and companies, grifts through massive hype, and if the ideas ever do come to fruition, they aren't delivered on time and/or as promised. Even his most successful product, the Model 3, remember when it was supposed to sell for $35, be full self-driving, and capable of making $35 annually as a driverless taxi when you weren't using it. He said it was fiscally insane to not buy one. Well, at least the Model 3 actually made it to market, unlike the Tesla Semi, Cybertruck, and Roadster 2, or the Hyperloop that turned from supersonic pods gliding on cushions of air in vacuum tunnels into a glorified underground 30-mile taxi service that can't meet required passenger count. Or his Solar City company he forced Tesla to buy to save his jerk because it was billions in debt. He was in court over that in 2021, which the solar roof tiles never came to be as promised, while he lied about it at a hype event. Or the dismal Starlink internet that requires tens of thousands of satellites for coverage, but has the same speed as satellite internet companies that only need 3-5 satellites for full global coverage, but costs insanely more. Or the SpaceX Boca Chica location that's broken the FAA regulations and has put multiple endangered species in danger of becoming extinct. The list goes on, and through it all, his sycophants will continue to support this charlatan. I can hear the pitter-patter of all the muskrats' feet as they come storming in to downvote and make comments to support their techno-king. Story 156. That you can see the Chinese wall from space. That there are different spots for different tastes on our tongue. Story 157. Hydrogen peroxide is good for cleaning wounds, and you can tell it's working because the bubbling effect is a sign it's eliminate germs. Story 158. That NASA partied too hard millions developing modern pens that would work in space, but the oh-so-practical Russians just used a pencil. Chortle, haha, government wasting money. Except it's not true. Pencils were always a hazard in spacecraft due to the graphite shavings, which could cause damage, and the fact that wood is flammable and therefore bad when it comes to space missions. But standard ballpoints failed in weightlessness. Both NASA and Russia used pencils until a private company called the Fisher Pen Company, working with their own money, invented a new nitrogen pressurized pen that would work in almost any conditions. They then sold these to both agencies at a very reasonable cost, and they are still the supplier to this day. Story 159. Donations you make at the register are not and cannot be used as a tax break for the company. Companies cannot claim your donations as their own. It's tax fraud. They are only a middleman and a marketing campaign for the charity. And don't give me the bullshit of corporations do illegal stuff all the time. You ever been with a company during an IRS audit? They'll fudge your whole life up. That's it for this video. Don't forget to support Vancher and my second channel, Vanchus. See you soon.